Who could have known that an antique music box that had been playing the same melody for 100 years was actually an encrypted message system used against German spies? Emma Wilson thought this music box inherited from her grandmother was just a nostalgic keepsake until the day she took it for repair changed everything. Welcome to One Human, One Story. Before we begin this captivating story, tell us in the comments if you have any family heirlooms that surprised you in your family, and if you believe real family secrets should be uncovered. Subscribe, because sometimes the biggest secrets are hidden in the smallest object. Emma Wilson was 29 years old and worked as a museum curator in Boston's prestigious Historical Society Museum. History was her passion, especially researching stories from the early 20th century, but she never imagined her own family had such a profound connection to that turbulent era. She had dedicated her career to preserving the stories of ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times, never realizing that one of those extraordinary stories belonged to her own bloodline. Emma's grandmother, Rose Margaret Wilson, had passed away in 2018 at the age of 96, and Emma had been extraordinarily close to her. Rose had been more than a grandmother. She had been Emma's confidant, her link to a past that seemed both distant and immediate. They had spent countless afternoons together in Rose's Victorian home on Beacon Hill, sipping tea from delicate china cups, while Rose shared carefully edited memories of the old days. Grandmother Rose was a profoundly mysterious woman, elegant in her bearing, even in her final years. She possessed an almost regal quality that made neighbors pause respectfully when she walked down the street. Her silver hair was always perfectly arranged, her posture impeccable despite her age, and her eyes held depth that suggested experiences far beyond the quiet life she appeared to have lived. She always talked about the old days with a wistful smile, but never went into specific detail. Whenever Emma pressed for more information about her youth, Rose would grow distant and say with finality, "Some things should stay in the past, darling. Some stories are better left untold." After Emma lost her grandmother, the task of cleaning out Rose's sprawling Victorian home had seemed overwhelming. The house was filled with decades of accumulated memories, rooms upon rooms of carefully preserved antique items, each piece seemingly chosen with deliberate care. There were hand-carved furniture pieces from the early 1900s, delicate lace curtains that had yellowed with age, but retained their intricate beauty, and shelves lined with leather-bound books in multiple languages. Among these treasures, the most precious and intriguing was a small, exquisitely crafted music box that Emma discovered in Rose's bedroom. This music box was unlike anything Emma had ever encountered in her professional work with antiques. The craftsmanship was absolutely extraordinary. Every surface was adorned with intricate engravings that seemed to tell a story of their own. The mahogany wood had been aged to a rich, deep brown that spoke of decades of careful handling, and the brass fittings had developed a beautiful patina that couldn't be replicated by modern techniques. When opened, the box revealed a tiny dancing figure, a woman in an elegant ball gown that spun gracefully to the accompaniment of a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to carry echoes of a bygone era. The melody itself was unlike anything Emma had heard before. It wasn't a popular tune from any era she could identify, nor did it follow conventional musical patterns. Instead, it had an almost mathematical precision to it, with notes that seemed deliberately placed rather than flowing naturally. The tune was both beautiful and somehow melancholic, as if it carried the weight of untold stories within its carefully constructed phrases. Each time Emma listened to it, she discovered new nuances, subtle variations in timing and emphasis that suggested layers of meaning beneath the surface. Emma had fallen completely in love with this music box and had given it a place of honor on her bedside table in her own Beacon Hill apartment. For 2 years, every night before going to bed, she would open it and listen to that beautiful, mysterious melody. The ritual had become as essential to her evening routine as brushing her teeth or reading a few pages of a book. The music seemed to transport her to another time, filling her small apartment with an atmosphere of old-world elegance and romance. But recently, the music box had started to show signs of its considerable age. The melody would sometimes stop mid-phrase, leaving an unsettling silence where there should have been music. The tiny dancing missing figure would occasionally stick in place, frozen in an awkward position that broke the spell of its graceful movement. The mechanism that had operated flawlessly for what must have been decades was finally beginning to fail, and Emma knew she couldn't bear to lose this last tangible connection to her beloved grandmother. Since Emma cherished this box beyond all her other possessions, she decided to have it professionally repaired, regardless of the cost. Through her work at the museum, she had heard of a legendary craftsman in Boston who specialized in restoring the most delicate and complex antique timepieces and music boxes. Heinrich Mueller was renowned throughout New England for his ability to breathe new life into mechanical marvels that other experts had declared beyond repair. Heinrich Mueller's shop was located in a narrow cobblestone alley in Boston's North End, tucked between a traditional Italian bakery and a shop that sold handmade leather goods. The building itself dated back to the 1800s, and Heinrich had occupied the same space for over 40 years. The shop was a wonderland for anyone fascinated by mechanical precision and historical craftsmanship. Every surface was covered with timepieces in various states of repair, grandfather clocks with intricate pendulums, delicate pocket watches with movements so complex they resembled tiny cities, and music boxes of every size and origin imaginable. Heinrich himself was a figure who seemed to have stepped out of another century. He was an elderly man, probably in his mid-70s, with steel-gray hair that he kept meticulously combed and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles that he wore pushed down on his nose. His hands, despite their age, remained remarkably steady, a necessity for the intricate work he performed daily. He was of German-American heritage, and his accent, though softened by decades in America, still carried traces of his family's European origin. His expertise with antique mechanisms was legendary. Museum curators from across the country regularly sought his services for their most precious and fragile pieces. On a crisp Wednesday morning in early October, Emma carefully wrapped her precious music box in layers of soft cloth and made her way to Heinrich's shop. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter, and Emma found herself walking more slowly than usual, reluctant to part with the music box even temporarily. When she pushed open the heavy wooden door to Heinrich's shop, a small brass bell announced her arrival with a gentle chime that seemed to harmonize with the various ticking sounds emanating from the hundreds of timepieces surrounding her. The shop was a sensory experience unlike any other. The air was filled with the symphony of countless mechanical movements, the steady tick-tock of pendulum clocks, the gentle whirring of music box mechanisms, and the occasional chime marking the hour or quarter hour. The scent of aged wood, metal polish, and machine oil created an atmosphere that spoke of decades of careful craftsmanship and meticulous attention to detail. Everywhere Emma looked, she saw marvels of engineering and artistry, some pieces clearly worth thousands of dollars, others valuable primarily for their historical significance rather than their monetary worth. Heinrich emerged from behind a workbench where he had been bent over a complex clock mechanism, his magnifying glass still perched on his forehead. He was wearing a leather apron that bore the stains and marks of decades of careful work, and his eyes immediately fixed on the wrapped bundle Emma carried with obvious reverence. "Good morning," Emma said, her voice betraying both excitement and nervousness. "I have something very special that I hope you can help me with. This music box belonged to my grandmother, and it means the world to me. Recently it's been having some mechanical problems, and I was hoping you might be able to repair it." Heinrich nodded slowly, his experienced eyes already assessing the way Emma held the package. Years of working with people and their treasured possessions had taught him to recognize when an item held deep emotional significance. "Of course, my dear. Please let me see what we're working with." Emma carefully unwrapped the music box and placed it on Heinrich's main workbench, which was positioned near a large window that provided optimal natural light for detailed work. As the cloth fell away, revealing the intricately decorated mahogany box with its brass fittings and delicate engravings, Heinrich's expression shifted subtly. He leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles and examining the piece with the intense focus that had made him legendary in his field. Heinrich picked up the music box with hands that, despite their age, moved with the confidence and precision of a master craftsman. He first examined the exterior carefully, noting every detail of the construction, the style of the engravings, and the particular type of wood and metal used in its creation. Then, with practiced movements, he opened the lid and activated the mechanism. The familiar melody began to play, but as Emma had described, it faltered after just a few measures, the sound becoming irregular and eventually stopping altogether. But something unusual happened as Heinrich listened to those first few notes. His face, which had been pleasantly professional moments before, underwent a dramatic transformation. The color seemed to drain from his cheeks, and his hands, so steady just moments before, began to tremble slightly. He set the music box down on the workbench, as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold, and took a step backward, his eyes never leaving the small wooden box. "Mein Gott," he whispered in German, so quietly that Emma almost didn't hear him. Then, louder, in English, Where did you say this box came from?" Emma was startled by the dramatic change in Heinrich's demeanor. "I told you, it belonged to my grandmother. She passed away 2 years ago and left it to me." "Why are you reacting this way? Is there something wrong with it?" Heinrich moved to his workbench chair and sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. He removed his spectacles and cleaned them nervously. A gesture Emma sensed was more about giving himself time to think than about improving his vision. When he replaced his glasses and looked directly at Emma, his expression was a complex mixture of awe, fear, and something that might have been recognition. "Young lady," Heinrich said, his voice carrying a weight and gravity that hadn't been there moments before, "this music box is not what it appears to be. This is not simply a beautiful antique or a sentimental keepsake. What you have here is extremely special and extremely rare." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What are you trying to tell me?" Heinrich stood up and walked to a locked cabinet at the far end of his workshop. He withdrew a key from his pocket and opened the cabinet, revealing shelves lined with reference books, historical documents, and what appeared to be technical manuals dating back many decades. He selected a thick, leather-bound volume and returned to the workbench, flipping through pages that were clearly well used and marked with handwritten notes. "This music box," Heinrich said, finding the page he was looking for and turning the book toward Emma, "was manufactured sometime between 1916 and 1918, but it was not created for the purpose of entertainment or decoration. It was designed and built as a sophisticated communication device used by intelligence operatives during the First World War." Emma stared at the page Heinrich was showing her, which contained detailed technical drawings and specifications that meant nothing to her untrained eye. "Communication device? I don't understand. It's just a music box." "No, my dear girl, it is much more than that." Heinrich's finger traced the technical drawing as he explained. "During the Great War, intelligence services on all sides became incredibly innovative in their methods of secret communication. Traditional codes and ciphers were constantly being broken by enemy cryptographers, so operatives needed new, more subtle ways to transmit critical information." Heinrich opened Emma's music box again and pointed to specific elements of its construction. "Look here, at these engravings that appear to be purely decorative, and here at these small markings on the interior of the lid. These are not random artistic flourishes. They are carefully placed indicators that correspond to a sophisticated encoding system." He activated the mechanism again, and as the familiar melody played its few working measures, Heinrich listened with the intensity of a conductor analyzing a symphony. The melody itself is the message. Each note, each pause, each variation in timing corresponds to letters or numbers in a predetermined code. The person receiving the message would know how to translate the musical phrases into words, coordinates, dates, or other crucial intelligence. Emma felt her world shifting beneath her feet. "Are you absolutely certain about this? How can you be so sure?" Heinrich closed the reference book and looked at Emma with an expression of profound seriousness. "Because, my dear, I have been studying these devices for over 30 years. When I was a young man in Germany, before I came to America, I worked briefly for a museum that specialized in wartime artifacts. We had exactly 3 of these musical cipher boxes in our collection, and I was part of the team that researched their history and function." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. "These boxes were incredibly rare, even during the war. Only a handful were ever made, and they were used exclusively for the most sensitive and dangerous intelligence operations. The craftsmen who made them were sworn to secrecy, and most of the documentation about their creation and use was destroyed when the war ended. Emma's mind was racing. But what does this mean about my grandmother? How would she have gotten something like this? That, Heinrich said quietly, is exactly what we need to find out. But I can tell you this much with certainty. Your grandmother was not simply a woman who happened to acquire an interesting antique to possess one of these devices. She would have been directly involved in intelligence work during the First World War. She would have been, in all likelihood, a spy. The word spy hung in the air between them like a thunderclap. Emma felt as if the familiar world she had known all her life was crumbling and reforming into something entirely different. Her gentle, tea-serving grandmother, a spy? It seemed impossible. Yet Heinrich's expertise and obvious emotional reaction to the music box made it clear that this was no casual speculation. I need to know more about your grandmother's background, Heinrich continued, his voice now carrying the urgency of someone who understood the historical significance of what they had discovered. What was her full name? Do you know her maiden name? What did she tell you about her life during the war years? Emma struggled to organize her thoughts. Her name was Rose Margaret Wilson, but that was her married name. I never knew her maiden name. She never talked about her family or her life before she met my grandfather. Actually, she rarely talked about my grandfather either, even though I know they were married for many years before he died. Heinrich was taking notes on a small pad, his handwriting reflecting the same precision he brought to his mechanical work. Did she ever mention where she lived during the war? What kind of work she did? Any friends or associates from that period? She was always very vague about those years, Emma replied, struggling to remember details that had seemed unimportant at the time. She would sometimes mention the old days with a sort of wistful sadness, but whenever I asked for specifics, she would change the subject or say that some things were better left in the past. Heinrich nodded knowingly. That would be consistent with someone who had been involved in classified intelligence work. Even decades later, many operatives maintained their silence about their wartime activities. The habits of secrecy, once formed, are difficult to break. Emma was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the implications of what Heinrich was telling her. So what should I do now? How can I find out the truth about my grandmother's past? The first step, Heinrich said, is to research whatever family documents and photographs you might have. Look for anything from the 1914 to 1920 period. Letters, official documents, photographs, anything that might give us clues about her activities during those years. And I will begin the process of decoding the melody in this music box. If I'm correct about its function, the message it contains might provide crucial information about your grandmother's role in whatever operation she was involved in. Emma felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. How long will it take you to decode the message? It's difficult to say. These encoding systems were deliberately complex, and without the original key or cipher book, I'll need to try various decryption methods. It could take days, or it could take weeks, but I promise you, I will not rest until we unlock the secrets this beautiful little box has been keeping for over a century. That evening, Emma returned to her apartment, with her mind spinning with questions and possibilities. The familiar surroundings of her home looked different now, as if the revelation about the music box had changed her perception of everything around her. She realized that her entire understanding of her family history, and particularly of her beloved grandmother, had been based on incomplete information. Emma spent that night and the following day systematically searching through every box, drawer, and storage space in her apartment, looking for any items that had belonged to her grandmother. She had been so focused on the emotional value of Rose's belongings that she had never carefully examined them for historical or factual information. In her bedroom closet, Emma found a large wooden trunk that she had brought from her grandmother's house, but had never fully explored. The trunk was heavy and old-fashioned, with brass corners and a complex locking mechanism that had been left open. When Emma lifted the lid, she was greeted by the scent of lavender and old paper, a smell that immediately brought back memories of her grandmother's house. The trunk was organized with the same meticulous care that had characterized everything about Rose's life. Photographs were arranged in chronological order and stored in protective envelopes. Documents were sorted by type and date. Personal items were wrapped in tissue paper and placed in small boxes. Emma began with the photographs, and immediately found images that she had never seen before. There were dozens of pictures from what appeared to be the 1915 to 1920 period, showing a young woman who was unmistakably her grandmother, but who looked entirely different from the elderly woman Emma had known. This young Rose was photographed in elegant clothing that suggested wealth and social position. More intriguingly, many of the photographs showed her in what appeared to be official or professional settings, rather than casual family situations. One photograph in particular caught Emma's attention. It showed Rose standing in front of what appeared to be a government building, wearing a crisp white blouse and dark skirt that looked almost like a uniform. She was holding a briefcase and standing next to a tall, handsome man in military dress. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in faded ink, RP and Lieutenant E. Hayes, Washington, D.C., November 1917. Emma stared at the photograph for a long time. The initials RP suggested that this was taken before Rose's marriage, meaning Palmer might be her maiden name, and the formal pose, the official-looking setting, and the presence of a military officer all supported Heinrich's theory that Rose had been involved in government work during the war. Continuing through the photographs, Emma found several more images that told a compelling story. There were pictures of Rose at what appeared to be formal government functions, always elegantly dressed and often in the company of men and women who had the bearing of officials or military personnel. There were photographs of her at train stations and harbors, sometimes carrying luggage that suggested travel. And there were several intimate photographs of Rose with the same military officer from the first picture, Lieutenant Hayes, in settings that suggested a romantic relationship. But it was among the documents that Emma found the most shocking discoveries. Carefully preserved in an envelope marked Important Papers was a collection of official-looking documents that provided concrete evidence of Rose's wartime activities. There was a letter of commendation from the U.S. War Department dated December 1918, praising Miss Rose Palmer for exemplary service to the nation during a period of exceptional danger and difficulty. There was a travel document authorizing Agent R. Palmer to travel to various East Coast cities on official business related to national security. Most significantly, there was a partially damaged document that appeared to be some kind of official report or summary. Much of the text was illegible due to age and water damage, but Emma could make out certain phrases: successful penetration of enemy network, intelligence of critical importance, recommended for highest recognition, but subject requests anonymity for security reasons. Emma realized that Heinrich had been absolutely correct. Her grandmother had not simply owned a music box used by spies. She had been the spy. The next day, Emma took the documents and photographs to Heinrich. When Heinrich examined the documents, he became very excited. "This is very important. Agent Rose Palmer worked in the War Department's Special Operations Division." "What does this mean?" Emma asked. "This means your grandmother was a spy, and this music box was a tool she used in her operations." Heinrich listened to the melody of the box again and took notes. "I can convert this melody to Morse code, but I need some time." A week later, Heinrich called Emma. "Come to the shop. I've solved the secret of the music box." Emma excitedly went to Heinrich's shop. Heinrich had written notes and codes on the table. "I converted the melody to Morse code and discovered something incredible." "What did you discover?" "This melody actually gives coordinates. It indicates a place in Washington, D.C. Heinrich showed Emma the paper. 38.8977 degree N, 77.0365 degree WW. These are the coordinates. When Emma searched for the coordinates on the internet, she was surprised. "This is a place near the White House." "Yes, but that's not all. There's also a second part to the melody. That part gives a date. March 15th, 1918, Heinrich continued. "I researched according to this date and discovered something very important. On that date, a major operation was conducted on the German espionage network, and many spies were caught." Emma held her breath. Did my grandmother play a role in this operation? According to the documents, yes. Rose Palmer was one of the key figures in this operation. She developed the encrypted communication system used to catch German spies. Emma was now amazed by her grandmother. Rose wasn't just an ordinary grandmother. She was a war hero. Heinrich said, "There might be more secrets in this box. Let's check if the music box has a secret compartment." Together they examined every inch of the box, and finally Heinrich found a small secret compartment. In this compartment was a very small piece of paper. The paper was very old, and the writing was faded, but Heinrich carefully read it. "Mein liebster Edward, wenn du dies liest, bin ich schon weg. Aber vergiss nicht, was wir getan haben, das Land zu retten. P. 1918. Emma said, "Isn't this German?" Yes, it means, "My dearest Edward, if you are reading this, I will already be gone. But don't forget what we did to save the country. RP 1918. Emma was astonished. Why did my grandmother write in German? Heinrich thought she was probably a double agent. The German spies thought she was also German, but she was actually working for America. This was a very dangerous game. That evening, when Emma returned home, she was in very mixed emotions. She had learned things about her grandmother she never knew. Rose was not only a dear grandmother, but also a brave spy and war hero. Emma decided to do more research. She went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and examined intelligence documents from the 1917 to 1918 period. After days of research, she found surprising information about Rose Palmer. Rose had indeed played roles in very important operations. She had infiltrated the German espionage network and obtained critical information. Thanks to her, dozens of German spies were caught, and many sabotage plans were prevented. But most importantly, Rose's story didn't end there. Emma also researched Edward and learned that he was also an intelligence officer. Rose and Edward had worked together and then married, but Edward had mysteriously died in 1919. There were no details about this in the documents, only died in the line of duty. When Emma shared this information with Heinrich was very impressed. Your grandmother was a real hero. This music box is not just an antique, it's a historical treasure. So what should I do now? Emma asked. This story needs to be known. Rose Palmer's story shouldn't be forgotten, Heinrich said. But you must be careful while doing this, because there might still be information that needs to remain secret. When Emma returned to the museum, she shared this discovery with the museum director. The museum director was very interested and suggested including Rose Palmer's story in an exhibition. Emma prepared an exhibition, Hidden Heroes of WWI, the Rose Palmer story. In the exhibition, the music box, documents, photographs, and Rose's story were displayed. The exhibition attracted great interest, especially history enthusiasts and families of war veterans were very impressed. One day, an elderly man came to the exhibition. He introduced himself as Edward Palmer's grandson. I'm James Palmer. Edward was my grandfather, but I knew very little about his life. Emma and James talked at length and together completed the story of Rose and Edward. Edward had also been a hero like Rose, but both had chosen to live quietly after the war. They never told anyone their stories. James said, "My grandfather never talked either. He wouldn't mention the past. Now I understand why." Emma and James did more research together and found Rose and Edward's wedding photographs. In these photographs, the music box was also visible. It had been given as a wedding gift, but not just a gift, also a communication tool to be used in emergencies. During the research, Emma discovered something else very important. Rose's diary had remained hidden in Edward's house. In this diary, Rose's experiences during the war were described in detail. According to the diary, Rose had participated in very risky operations to infiltrate German spies. Sometimes she lived with a German identity for days and collected important information. The music box was her most reliable communication tool because no one would suspect a music box. There were very touching moments in the diary. One day Rose had written, "Today I was in a very dangerous situation. German agents began to suspect me, but thanks to my music box I was able to send a message to Edward and he saved me. Sometimes I doubt this war will end, but as long as my Edward is by my side, I can handle anything." In another entry, Rose had written, "Our music box is not just a tool, but also a symbol of the bond between Edward and me. Every melody reminds me of his voice. When the war ends, we will live a peaceful life together. But first, we must save our country." Emma cried while reading this diary. Her grandmother had not only been a brave spy, but also a woman with very deep emotion. After the exhibition achieved great success, Emma decided to write a book. In the music box cipher, Rose Palmer's Secret War, she told the story of Rose and Edward in all its details. When the book was published, it attracted great interest, especially gaining the appreciation of history enthusiasts and espionage story lovers. One day, while Emma was working at the museum, an elderly woman came. "I'm Margaret Hoffman. I'm from Germany. My grandfather Hans Hoffman was spying in America during World War I. He was caught by Rose Palmer. Emma was surprised. Really? Yes. And our family kept this secret for years. But when I saw your exhibition, I wanted to learn my grandfather's story. I was curious about what kind of woman Rose Palmer was. Margaret continued. My grandfather talked about Rose Palmer in prison. He said she was very intelligent and brave. He even spoke of her with respect. Emma talked with Margaret for a long time and understood that Rose's story had an important place not only in American history, but also in German history. Among the spies Rose caught were very important names, and thanks to these operations, the course of the war changed. A year later, Emma took the music box to Heinrich again. I want to restore this box perfectly. Heinrich gladly accepted and restored the box to its original condition. Now, the music box both works and preserves its historical value. The music box is now displayed in a special showcase at the museum. Visitors can both listen to its melody and learn its story. Every day, dozens of people come to hear Rose Palmer's story. When Emma listens to the music box now, she doesn't just hear a beautiful melody. She also feels the story of courage, sacrifice, and love behind that melody. Her respect and love for her grandmother has increased even more. Rose was not only a dear grandmother, but also an unforgettable hero. Emma's story doesn't end here either. She now helps other families discover similar secrets, because Rose Palmer's story showed that sometimes the greatest heroes live quietly among us, and the most valuable secrets are hidden in the most ordinary-looking objects. Now I ask you, do you have objects in your family that hide such secrets? Are there family stories you've been curious about but couldn't find answers to? Share them in the comments, because at One Human, One Story, we believe every family has its own unique heroes. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, like it, subscribe, and share it, because real heroes' stories should never be forgotten. Until we meet in the next video, and remember, sometimes the biggest secrets are hidden in the smallest objects.